In this video, we're going to move away from level blueprints for a little bit and into actor blueprints. Now, the reason is because I wouldn't want to remake everything from scratch if I have something that I want to repeat. So for example, imagine that I have an audio trigger volume. We don't really need to set all of our audio trigger volumes inside of our level blueprints. You could imagine that over time, that would make our level blueprints very, very difficult to navigate, right? If we're doing this for every single one we want to do. So instead of doing that, if I know that my audio volume is fairly self-contained, so if my audio trigger doesn't really need to talk to other objects in the level, it just needs to know about itself and play an audio clip that it defines, then I can break that out into a more modular blueprint. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into my project mechanics right here. A blueprint actor is going to exist as a project asset. And so similar to a prefab, you might think in Unity if you've used that program. I'm going to right click down here inside of my project assets, go up to blueprint class. Now there's a lot of different kinds of classes we can make. These are all going to be too complicated for now. But just know that an actor blueprint class is something that needs to be in the world in order to activate. So I'm going to click actor. I'm going to place these in the world, so I think it's appropriate. Naming convention, I'm just going to do BP underscore and call this audio trigger, like so. Now, when you create a new asset inside of your project folder down here, you'll see this little asterisk. This means that it's been created, but it hasn't really been saved yet. So I'm going to hit the Save All button right after, and we'll see all the new stuff we've created here. I'm going to hit Save Selected. I'm going to open up my Blueprint audio trigger, and it's going to look really scary at first. If it does not open up into the viewport, just know that there's an event graph, a construction script, and then a viewport. We're going to stick with this and then move to the event graph, but the viewport is helpful for seeing what this would look like, what this actor will look like once we put it into the level. Again, think of this, if you've used Unity before, as a prefab. We're just going to assemble some components on this object and then add some logic inside the event graph. So inside of viewport, what I want to do is I want to create my collision. So before, when we were making a box trigger in our level and dragging that in, I'm going to make this a component as part of this actor. And to do that, you look in the top left, this add component. If you click that drop down and you type in box, you get box collision right here, you'll see it'll add this. You'll also see it appear inside of your viewport. Now you can actually reposition this. You can, pull it up. This circle right here, this is your root position. And so if you think the root position may be on the ground, then I may want to position this a little bit above the ground. And if you want to change the size for this, there's a few different ways to do that. I recommend just expanding it with the box extents right here. So, just pull that out some, maybe you want it a little bit taller. That's fine. And you can pull that up. All right. And you can make that more exact if you like, but I think that's fine. It's a reasonable size for a modular box trigger. So I'm going to hit compile and save. So now that we have our trigger, I need to actually call an event whenever we overlap this trigger. Now I'm going to hop back out of my blueprint real quick and compile and save. So we need to create an instance of this blueprint audio trigger in order for it to work inside of our level. So if I click and drag this, we're creating an instance of this audio trigger. So I'm going to drag it over here, kind of near this corner of the wall. And you'll see that I made changes to my map. So I'm just going to Control S and save. And we can actually see what this volume will look like, what this trigger volume will look like. And you can also see the position of it when we move it around. So I'm going to go back into my level blueprints. Now that it exists inside of my level, I can actually add some functionality. I'm going to go over to event graph. Now it's going to come with a few default nodes. We don't really need these. Event tick is like an update, like a main loop. It's just happening every frame. Don't need that. That would be absurd. Actor begin overlap. We could probably use this if we wanted to. I'm actually going to show you another way to do it because I think it'll help connect the ideas a little bit more. And begin play, this may be something we want to use later if we want to call something like a on level start, or something that happens one time at the beginning of the map loading. We may want to do some setup stuff here, but for now, I think I don't need it. Compile, save. Inside of our blueprint class, we can get a reference to any of our components very easily because it's all self-contained. This is a component that's part of this whole blueprint class. We could not, for example, inside of this blueprint class that is modular, that we're dragging in our scene, easily get access to other level objects. It doesn't know about them. It wouldn't be modular if everything knew about everything. So the trick to a blueprint class is just to remember it needs to be self-contained, or else you need to do some searching or some other way to grab it. So because our box collision is part of our blueprint, we can drag that into the scene and we can get a reference to it. It's actually not what I want to do, but I'm going to show you that you can. So you could, for example, add an audio source and get a reference to that if you wanted. You click the box collision. Part of the box collision is being able to call an event, an on overlap event. So if I right click, making sure that I have the box component selected, I expand add event for box, and I expand collision. You'll see one called on component begin overlap. You'll see a couple others. You could technically use those too if you want, but I'm going to use begin overlap. As soon as something enters this trigger volume that we defined on this component, you'll see that we get access to a lot of things. We can do many things with this when we don't need most of them. One thing we do need access to, though, is the other actor, because we want to test and see if the other actor is the player, just like we did in the other level blueprint. So first, we're going to run a function that Unreal provides to us where we can easily grab the player pawn, which is the pawn that the player is currently controlling. So get player pawn, that should return the player. And we're going to test equals. You'll see how it puts it in the top node. It kind of bugs me to cross them like that. So if you hold down Alt and you click this, you can actually remove a line. I think it's a good teaching opportunity. We're going to drag the other actor node and then our get player pawn to make sure that when we get the player, we're getting the same thing when we're also detecting what entered this trigger volume, because we only want this to activate on the player. So if this is true, remember, we want to do a test if it's a true or false. So we need a branch. And pull off of that and do a branch. Pull in this condition. If the other actor is the player, right, they're the same thing, then we can continue. And for now, we're just going to test it. We're going to say if the other player entered this, print string for testing, player has entered this volume. Press enter, compile, save. So at this point, we want to test and make sure that our player can get this string to appear when we enter our collision. Save that, pop out, hit play. And you'll notice this happen. You see how it calls it multiple times? This is because we're not really being that specific with what kind of collisions we're looking for. So I want to show you one more thing. If we go to our blueprint audio trigger right here, on our box, we actually have access to, you're going to see this collapsed right here. We have access to more information about what types of things we want to pay attention to when it comes to collision. You come over here, you select the box, you scroll down. By default, it's just going to overlap everything that is able to move. I think that's a little bit overboard. So we're going to go to custom and we're going to turn everything off by default except for pawns, because our player is a pawn, and I think it's probably detecting other things on the player and kind of doing a mixed signal here. So we're just going to set it to pawns only and then test if it's the player. So make sure you click that overlap right there, and that will turn everything off except for players. We're going to compile, save. And you'll notice that if you later wanted to only detect projectiles or vehicles, for example, and you flag those correctly, then it might be a useful option to have. Once we save that, minimize, hit play. We should now see this get called once whenever we enter the volume, and you'll recognize that we have one here, but we could technically duplicate this. Maybe you already did, it's fine. And this is why it's important to create modular systems, because we don't have all of this inside of this level, and we may want to put this in a different level too, right? Because we could do other things with it. But at the very least, we're just making sure that we can hit this point and that the player is coming in there. It's pretty cool. We can actually add more components if we want, audio, particles, and so forth. But for now, we've proven that the system works. And we've proven that we can create something. I'm going to hit Save All right here. So we've created something that we can add to our level as creating instances of this thing, which we can use to do other game behaviors.